People were very disturbed by the ambiguities around this, around the woman at the time that it was exhibited. They were uncertain as to whether this was a sort of grande dame in her sort of permanent loge, or whether potentially she was something less sort of less comfortable. So whether she was just a sort of part of a fleeting, romance for the evening. And people start to comment also on what she's wearing. Is this actually a sort of wonderful couture gown that's been sort of ordered from Worth, the great designer, or in fact is this something that you could now start to buy almost off the peg, Pret-à-Porter in Paris, where the department stores had started to open. The Bon Marché opens in 1852, and for the first time these sort of fashionable clothes were starting to become available to a wider clientele. And so we spent a lot of time looking at this picture, the Courtauld, through the lens also of social satire, totally different from, I think, your perspective, but how you can see at the time that the theatre box is used as a stage on which social typecasting is played out. So some rough provincials who crowd, a crowd of 8 of them squeeze into a sort of little 4-seater loge, or a nouveau riche dad is told off by his sort of elegant daughter for laughing too loudly and doesn't know how to behave. So there is a whole sort of backstory to this image that contemporary audiences would absolutely have brought to bear on its interpretation. Even, I think, on these little wonderful flicks, which are ermine tails and part of her gown, and just a clue as to how sort of wealthy her attire is. Now, well, on to sort of the unknowable sort of picture, I think, in our collection, which is in a sense also about not being able to know, I think, itself. This is Manet's bar at the Folies Bergères, painted the year before he dies in 1883. It's exhibited in the Salon the previous year, and William has lots to say about this, but just to remind you of the fact that Manet, in distinction to the Impressionists, always felt that the official academy, the official salon, was really the great sort of stage of battle, where the establishment had to be confronted and essentially sort of overthrown, the conventions subverted. So he never exhibited with the Impressionists. This was really a picture which was designed to be shown in that crowded context of the Salon of 1882.
I mean, I think this is obviously, when you see this painting as an adolescent or as an adult, as one comes back to it, is one of the miracles of painting in the last centuries. One could spend the whole time just looking at the way that forearm of the woman is painted. All that slight tightening of the band around the top of the arm. It's such a perfect combination of sensual description and of material becoming that flesh. So we know that in fact this is, it's a flake white, and it's got some titanium white, and it's got various other components in it, but there's something about that slabness of that white that is such a perfect piece of, such an evocative piece of painting of flesh that one, I could have spent hours just devouring that arm, never mind the rest of the whole painting. And then the details in it, one could learn all one ever wanted to know about still life painting from looking at the way the gold foil is painted, that one can't stop believing in that gold foil. Even then you can see most of it is done with quite a dirty brown in the yellow to make the shadow of the gold, and a couple of white highlights that make you see the crinkle of the gold. And these late flower, the most glorious paintings were Manet's last flower paintings in the few months before he died. So from this period onwards, which were usually just 1 or 2 flowers in a jam jar, very, very simply and directly painted, where you feel here is someone at the end of their life in complete control, not thinking, how do I paint a flower? What does the flower look like? What is the shape of it? But moving directly from the palette to the canvas, putting the marks down, completely confident that the flower and the specific flower will emerge, that the glass of that heavy French wine glass will come through. And then the details, which I only saw, having looked at this picture for maybe the 30th time, of the feet on the flying trapeze at the top of the painting. But fundamentally, the picture also holds it. You come back to looking, or for me, I come back to looking at the details of the still life elements, at the flowers, at the woman's breast, at the look of her eyes, and that's given, what is the shadow that is put in just above the lids of her eyes that give her such an extraordinary stare. But there's a fundamental riddle which is unsolved in the painting about where the person is who's looking. Where is he in the mirror? If there's a mirror behind the woman, why is she at that strange angle? We are aware of the world being constructed for the painting rather than the painting feeling it has to reflect the world. The man who's looking at her should in fact be us staring at her where we are face on in the painting here. So these are things that won't be got right, and there's an understanding of the pleasure that Manet had in saying, no, he will reconstruct the world as he wants for the painting to find its rightness. And part of our pleasure is being caught between celebrating that impossibility of the view, of knowing that it's optically an impossible set of positions, and being held by the complete realism of the evocation of the bottles, the woman, the table, the marble, the mandarins, and everything.
It's interesting when we take students round, sort of the first year students, their comments will range from, well, did he just get it wrong? Did he not care? Was he actually just really more interested in the wonderful still life details that William's been talking about, and the rest just, was not very important to him? I mean, we do know that that the changes he made were very deliberate. We know that he set this up in his studio, that the real barmaid, who was Suzanne, a barmaid from the Folies Bergère, came and posed for him. And so that clearly, one can't just say he got it wrong or didn't care. These were very sort of deliberate dislocations that he was introducing in the picture, these sort of inconsistencies and sort of this logical sort of incoherence that is at the heart of this thing. And it is, again, the thing that contemporary reviewers pick up on. You get cartoons in which a composition is corrected, for example, and missing, I think, ultimately the point that this is a picture that is proclaiming that the modern world cannot anymore be sort of logically understood from a single point of view, from one sort of fixed, absolute, authoritative perspective. And I just wanted to ask you one more thing about this, and that is just that sense of how these things may emerge out of the studio, which for you is such a sort of important sort of creative space, that sense of possibility and not knowing as one embarks on a process, which must have been part of this, the creation of this work as well.
Well, I mean, for me, I'd done a lot of work in theatre, and in theatre you obviously work with the floor is the floor of the stage, and you build the walls of the set, and that's a kind of given. And within that, the play is worked out. And then I had a period working on really bad films. But what I understood from working in really bad, low-budget films was the way in which, in film, different to in theatre, the world would be reconstructed for each shot. So if your walls looked slightly too far away, it'd physically bring one wall closer to another. If one actor was too short for the other, you'd put a box and put the person on a box. You might well find a table that's here, but for the composition, you want the glass in it. So the table will be lifted at a completely unnatural height to do it. And the lighting would be constructed also simply as a plastic element, even in a bad film, not just in a good film. That's the way the film would be structured, which gave me an understanding of the way in which not just that these kind of works were made, but the way that one could play with space in the picture frame, whether you're making a drawing, a painting, or now even a piece of theatre. So I'm sure there was the same kind of, there was a sketch, I'm sure, of the geographic relationship of the mezzanine floor of the Folies Bergère and the people you could see above and below, and details like the circles, which are electric lights, and then assembling the items for the. I'm sure that Manet must have sort of, okay, now this is just going to be the pleasure, the 6 champagne bottles, the bottles of beer, those he knew was onto a good thing. That was going to be a holiday, painting those for those days that he would paint on That Still Life. But the fundamental shifting and structuring, I'd love to have seen early stages of, I mean, there's some drawings at the British Museum that I saw 2 days ago of early drawings of Hogarth for one of his series, in which he's working just with drawings of the fundamental position of figures on the page. You know, someone who is a woman with a child becomes a woman with a wheelbarrow, and the wheelbarrow disappears, and you have a woman crippled without legs on a trolley pulling herself forward as a room shifts shape, it becomes deeper. And in these sketches, in a way, what that process was for Manet to arrive at saying, no, in fact, the reflection needs to be right off at the side. We need to have a gap between the woman and her. There's no overlap at all between the woman, or tiny on the sleeve, between the woman and the back view of herself. Is kind of fantastic. I mean, how the great works of art like this, how they finally come together. What are the contingent pieces that fall into place? One can kind of construct possible ways in which they were done. Whether he had 2 different people standing in position behind the woman without a mirror to find where they might be.
Well, we do have a couple more slides, but I wonder, since it is now 4, whether we should stop there. We have Seurat and Modigliani, but if you're... They're out. Seurat and Modigliani don't make the cut. So maybe we could... I think Jasper is in the corner there going to be asking for some questions.
Would anybody like to ask a question? Can you hear me?
Yes.
I was very touched by the description of your dad buying a print, and you even said where.
Yeah.
And this is a little bit autobiographical, but no, it's not. I want your autobiography, your biography. Can you say a bit about what you think that meant to your dad to import this print and the other prints, and what they meant to him? And what I'm really interested in is were they discussed at home? Were pictures talked about?
This was Modigliani as well, I think. Was that the point you
Oh, I mean, there was a Modigliani. It may well have been this one. First in the dining room, then hanging behind the front door. And I remember once a dealer, I think from Wildenstein, came to Johannesburg in the 1970s and came for supper. And after the supper, came up to my father and said to him quietly that didn't he think he was treating the Modigliani a little bit casually, putting it behind the front door? And my father explained, no, the lighting was very bad, and that's, in fact, you could see it's not a real one. For someone who'd never seen a reproduction, I think. I think there was a sense that if you didn't have money to buy paintings, it was a way of having paintings in the house with prints. And I think it was much more common that people would buy and frame prints and not just put them up like posters the way we did from the 1960s and 70s on, when you'd buy a print, but it would be stuck up with masking tape, you were aware.